The gambling companies are absolutely telling Adam Silver what to do. I mean, it's a disaster.
It turns out those hefty penalties slapped on the Utah Jazz and Indiana Pacers had nothing to do with competitive spirit or the fan experience. It was all about protecting the sportsbooks. The fan base is furious, and we might actually be witnessing the beginning of the end for Silver's tenure. Let's break down exactly what happened with this crackdown. On February 12th, 2026, the league hammered the Jazz with a $500,000 fine and hit the Pacers for $100,000. Utah had been sitting key starters like Lauri Markkanen, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Jusuf Nurkic during the entire fourth quarter of winnable games. One glaring example was a February 7th collapse against Orlando, where Utah somehow managed to surrender a 17-point lead. Meanwhile, Indiana sat Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam, Andrew Nembhard, and Aaron Nesmith during a loss to Utah, even though the league deemed them healthy enough to play. 2 days later, on February 14th, 2026, Adam Silver took the podium at All-Star Weekend. The commissioner didn't mince words. He bluntly stated that the current tanking epidemic is the worst he has seen in recent history. He threatened extreme measures to curb the behavior, mentioning everything from stripping teams of draft picks to completely overhauling the lottery system. He basically admitted the current model is broken. There is no question that what we are seeing right now is not working, Silver declared. He tried to frame the narrative around the ticket-buying public and the television audience. He insisted, "We had better not lose sight of our fans here. We had better not lose sight of the people who support this league day in and day out." On the surface, it sounded like a leader protecting the integrity of the game. It sounded noble. However, just 48 hours later, on February 16th, 2026, Ben Golliver from the Washington Post dropped a bombshell on the Greatest of All Talk podcast. Golliver pulled back the curtain, noting, "We know how much the NBA has gotten in bed with gambling. Over-unders are at stake. Player props are at stake," he explained. "If coaches are just willy-nilly not playing guys the entire game without advance notice, you are going to have a lot of angry gamblers and a lot of angry gambling companies. So, I think that was one aspect of why he had to lay the smackdown, so to speak." This perspective completely changed the context of Silver's speech. If Golliver is right, those fines, the aggressive press conference, and the threats about draft picks weren't really about the fans at all. It was about stopping the bleeding for sportsbooks. When coaches pull starters unexpectedly, it wrecks the betting lines set by partners like DraftKings and FanDuel. Golliver highlighted the Jazz as the prime offender. He posed the question, if you bench guys in the fourth, how many wagers does that ruin? Vegas sets the lines assuming the best players will actually play. Point spreads, over-unders, and player props all hinge on that assumption. When starters get hooked in a close fourth quarter, the math breaks. Bettors lose cash they technically should have won. The house takes an unexpected hit. Reports suggest the gambling industry launched a pressure campaign, effectively telling the NBA to prioritize betting stability over team autonomy. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. The debate wasn't about whether the NBA should penalize losing on purpose. The real question became, who are these punishments actually serving? Notably, Silver's speech completely skirted the topic of gambling, sticking to talking points about fan service and systemic repairs. He blamed the loaded 2026 draft class and preached collective responsibility, urging owners to realize that we are all in this together. But what he didn't say was louder than what he did. He spoke about the fans, the draft, and the competition committee, but he never uttered the words DraftKings or FanDuel. He ignored the billions of dollars changing hands between the league and its betting partners. That silence, paired with Golliver's intel, exposed a massive disconnect between Silver's public stance and the reality behind closed doors. To grasp why this tanking epidemic is such a big deal, you have to look at the sheer scale of the problem in the 2025-2026 season. We aren't talking about a couple of cellar dwellers giving up in April. Roughly 1/3 of the entire league is shamelessly jockeying for draft position, and they started doing it months ago. The motivation is obvious. Prospects like Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, and AJ Dibansa head up a class that scouts are calling one of the deepest and most talented in years. In a league where one superstar can define a franchise for a decade, the incentive to bottom out has never been higher. A number one pick isn't just a roster spot. He's a jersey seller and a savior. The Utah Jazz have effectively become the mascot for this race to the bottom. Sitting at 18 wins and 38 losses with zero playoff hopes, Utah went all in on the lottery, and their methods were incredibly bold. They would compete for 3 quarters, then pull the plug, benching the starters to ensure a fourth quarter collapse. Coach Will Hardy took heat for this strategy, especially after trading for Jaren Jackson Jr., only to limit his minutes when the game was on the line. That $500,000 fine was a record for tanking violations, yet it didn't seem to alter Utah's game plan one bit. The Indiana Pacers, however, were a different story. 1 year after making the NBA Finals, Indiana imploded to a 15-40 record. An early season run of 6-31 proved this wasn't just a slump. While Tyrese Haliburton was dealing with an Achilles recovery, the franchise had a deeper, structural reason to lose. They owe a 2026 first-round pick to Toronto, but it is top 8 protected. If Indiana finishes in the bottom 8, they keep the pick. That clause turned every defeat into a victory for the front office. It wasn't just them. The Washington Wizards were sitting at 14-39 after shutting down Anthony Davis for the year with hand and groin issues, injuries that popped up right after a controversial trade. Trae Young was also shelved with a leg injury. Whether those medical decisions were legitimate or convenient, the result was identical. Washington firmly planted its flag in the tank wars, eyeing prospects like Ace Bailey. Meanwhile, the Brooklyn Nets, at 15-38, committed to the long haul after burning 5 first-rounders in the previous draft. With a young roster, dismal assist numbers, and a reliance on volume scoring from Cam Thomas, Brooklyn was clearly designed to lose games. The Sacramento Kings held the league's worst record at 12-44. Buried by a 14-game losing skid, the organization transparently pivoted to playing rookies over vets to secure the top spot. Then you have the New Orleans Pelicans at 15-41. Because they traded their unprotected pick to Atlanta, every time the Pelicans lose, they actually help the Hawks' draft odds, a bizarre twist in the incentives. The Dallas Mavericks went into a tailspin at 19-35 following the Luka Doncic blockbuster. Portland was also in rebuild mode, dealing with the fallout from the Chanty Phillips indictment. The Clippers faced accusations of tanking to manipulate a pick owed to Oklahoma City, while the Hornets and Bulls quietly piled up losses to improve their own standing. The sheer number of teams trying to lose is what sets this season apart. There is a reason Silver labeled it the worst year in NBA history. This isn't just 1 or 2 bad teams giving up in the final weeks. It is a systemic collapse involving 10 or more franchises, stretching from opening night all the way past the All-Star break. The owners aren't exactly sweating the fines. One executive admitted to reporters that they would happily hand over a blank check for a top 3 pick, simply because landing a franchise-altering talent is worth infinitely more than any penalty the league office can throw at them. A $500,000 fine for an organization worth billions? That's just a rounding error. It's merely the cost of doing business. But this marriage to gambling didn't just appear out of nowhere. The NBA's entanglement with betting was a deliberate, calculated strategy that started long before the average fan caught on, and it has mutated into a full-blown dependency that now dictates how the league functions at its core. Make no mistake, Adam Silver was the architect of this partnership. Flashback to 2014. While other major leagues were treating gambling like a contagious disease that needed to be quarantined, Silver was arguing to bring it out of the shadows, regulate it properly, and monitor integrity threats in real time. He was placing a calculated wager of his own. Silver positioned the NBA as the industry's best friend, banking on an inevitable shift in American law and culture. That payout hit in 2018 when the Supreme Court struck down PASPA. That decision kicked the doors wide open for state-by-state legalization. Suddenly, the sports betting industry was fully operational, and Americans threw down over $119 billion in a single year. The Big Four sports leagues tripped over themselves, scrambling to partner with the books. But thanks to Silver's early groundwork, the NBA was already miles ahead. The partnerships they forged weren't just surface-level sponsorships. They were wired directly into the league's mainframe. DraftKings and FanDuel became official co-partners. Sportsbook branding plastered every arena. Broadcasts started flashing live odds on screen, not as a gimmick, but as a standard, integrated feature of the viewing experience. Even the players got in on the action, with superstars like LeBron James and Kevin Durant inking their own endorsement deals with betting platforms. The league even gave owners the green light to hold equity in sportsbook operations. The line between basketball and betting didn't just get blurry. It was systematically erased, replaced by a financial pipeline pumping billions in shared revenue. The money involved is astronomical. Projections show U.S. leagues collectively pulling in $4.2 billion in betting revenue, with the NBA taking a massive cut. It's not a side hustle anymore. It's a load-bearing wall of their financial structure. And this is why Golliver's reporting hits so hard. When gambling action covers the entire 48 minutes, and a coach benches his starters in the fourth quarter of a tight game, every single wager relying on those players gets torched. Point spreads that were carefully calculated become instantly worthless. The sportsbook takes a hit, the bettor feels scammed, and the whole ecosystem of trust that legal gambling relies on begins to fracture. Tanking destroys betting integrity without warning. If gamblers suspect the game is rigged or unserious, they'll stop betting or take their money to a different sport. For a league that staked its future business model on gambling engagement, that is a nightmare scenario. The NBA's embrace of gambling has also coincided with a shady rise in betting-related scandals involving players and officials. You had Jonte Porter getting banned from the league for running a betting scheme. Then, there was the situation with Phillips, indicted on gambling charges while serving as head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. We aren't talking about minor slip-ups from benchwarmers here. These were systemic failures involving people at the highest levels of operation. And looking beyond the NBA, the landscape was just as ugly. Cleveland Guardians pitchers Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz faced indictments for fixing pitches. 6 NCAA players were accused of running betting rings. Proposition bets, which account for roughly 70% of sportsbook revenue, were flagged as the danger zone because fixing an individual player's stats is way easier than rigging a final score. Public trust was already nosediving. Surveys revealed that 49% of Americans believe sports betting compromises the integrity of the games. Even worse, 79% of fans specifically expressed distrust in the NBA following this wave of scandals. Another poll found that 70% of respondents think betting harms integrity, while 65% are convinced athletes are altering their play to satisfy the bookies. This was the toxic atmosphere Adam Silver stepped into at All-Star Weekend when he preached about protecting the fans. The irony? The league he runs built the very gambling machine that's now causing the problems he claims to be solving. Let's be real about the history and hypocrisy here. Tanking in the NBA isn't new. It's as old as the draft itself. Every generation has dealt with its own flavor of this problem, along with the league's clumsy attempts to fix it. Before the lottery started in 1985, the draft was simple. The worst team in each conference got the first pick. The incentive to lose was so obvious and direct that it led to some of the most shameless basketball ever played. The most notorious example was the Houston Rockets, who tanked the end of their season to secure Hakeem Olajuwon, a pick that defined their franchise for 2 decades. The league fought back by introducing the draft lottery, a system designed to add enough chaos to the process that losing wouldn't guarantee a reward. But let's be honest, the lottery didn't stop tanking, it just changed the math. Instead of guaranteeing the top spot, being terrible just gave you the best ticket in the raffle. Over the decades, the league kept tweaking the odds. In 2019, they gave the bottom 3 teams an equal 14% shot at the number 1 pick, trying to kill the race to be the absolute worst. The theory was that if the difference between the worst record and the 3rd worst record was negligible, teams wouldn't have a reason to lose aggressively. It sounded reasonable on paper, but back then, you had one rogue GM gaming the system while the rest of the league held their nose. Today, it's a collective effort. You've got 10 or more teams running the same lose-now playbook. With the loaded 2026 draft class on the horizon, it's turned into an arms race where finishing second to last is basically a win. Silver's response has been a mix of small tweaks and big speeches. They rolled out player participation policies in 2023 to curb load management. They created the NBA Cup to give bad teams something to play for mid-season. But when it comes to tanking, the competition committee is stuck with a know-it-when-you-see-it standard, which makes enforcement a joke. That is not necessarily a position we want to be in, Silver admitted. He even suggested it might be time to take a fresh look at the antiquated lottery system. But fresh looks are Silver's signature move. As Times the Ringer Times noted, under Silver's watch, the NBA has reformed the lottery, added the play-in tournament, launched the NBA Cup, tweaked the schedule, expanded replay, and overhauled the All-Star format multiple times. Every change was sold as the solution. Every change failed to fix the root issue. In a league where one superstar can change a franchise's destiny, losing will always pay better than mediocrity. Mark Cuban, the Mavs owner, offered a completely different take. Cuban argued the NBA should stop fighting tanking and embrace it. He slammed the fines and claimed that rebuilding gives fans actual hope for the future. He pushed the focus toward affordability, making games cheaper for the average fan rather than policing roster management. And he hit on an uncomfortable truth. The current business model prices out the very fans Silver claims to protect, while the gambling companies Silver is catering to aren't exactly buying tickets. Silver even theoretically opened the door to the nuclear option, abolishing the draft entirely in favor of a rookie free agency system with salary slots. Incoming players would pick their teams based on mutual interest, an idea he floated without actually committing to. Just another fresh look on a long list of theoretical cures. But we are facing a massive credibility crisis. When you stack it all up, the tanking, the fines, the gambling pressure, the press conferences, it looks like a league that's lost its way. If the NBA is shaping policy to keep sportsbooks happy, its independence is already compromised. A post on X from Dunk Central amplifying Golliver's report racked up over 13,000 likes, sparking a flood of comments from fans who already suspect the league's motives are compromised. Threads on R, NBA, and the Heap are absolutely lighting up, with users calling out the gambling influence as a massive issue for basketball and sports in general. People are pointing to the elephant in the room, the glaring contradiction between Silver's public speeches about integrity and the league's private addiction to betting money. It's not just a perception problem. The hard data actually backs up the skepticism. A 2025 Turning Point report from ESPN showed that 43% of American adults see legalized sports betting as bad for society, and that figure was only going up. A nasty string of scandals involving guys like Porter, Rozier, and Billups had completely shattered the foundation of trust that professional sports are built on. Once fans start suspecting that gambling money is pulling the strings, everything gets called into question. Every weird foul call, every surprise lineup change, and every upset win suddenly becomes fuel for conspiracy theories. Then you throw prediction markets into the mix, and it gets even more complicated. Silver explicitly talked about the risks involved here: integrity issues, insider trading, and players getting harassed by angry bettors. But the other leagues are sprinting in the opposite direction. The NHL was the first major organization to partner up with prediction markets. Then in 2025, MLS signed an exclusive deal with Polymarket that critics immediately tore apart. When you look at the global picture, it is just as messy, especially with massive, multi-million-dollar deals involving giants like DraftKings. Across the board, betting cash has become so baked into the revenue structure of pro sports that trying to remove it now would basically bankrupt the system. These leagues are hooked on the money, and like any addiction, the user isn't in control anymore, the substance is. But the NBA is in a uniquely toxic spot because they are dealing with tanking, gambling, and a regular season that nobody watches, all happening at the same time. The regular season has already lost its spark for a lot of people. Between load management, a bloated playoff bracket, and the play-in tournament, individual games feel meaningless. Tanking just made it worse. And when the league finally cracked down on losing, it looked like they were doing it to protect Vegas odds rather than the integrity of the game, which really ticked people off. Now, people defending Silver will say he is just doing his job managing all the different groups involved while trying to keep the product competitive. But look at who those groups are. You have the gambling companies, the fans, the owners, and the players. You can't make everyone happy without selling out somewhere. So, Adam Silver threw the doors wide open for gambling. He built the partnerships. He pushed to make it legal. He rolled out the red carpet for sportsbooks right inside the arenas and on the broadcasts. Now we are seeing the fallout in real time. Teams are tanking, betting companies are squeezing the league office, and the commissioner is handing out fines that seem to protect the spread more than the sport. He stands at a podium and talks about the fans, but those fans are watching the game and wondering if what they are seeing is even real. Thanks for watching. If you want to catch another deep dive like this one, go ahead and click one of the boxes on your screen right now.